In the year 1532, beneath the blood-red canopy of the eastern sky, there came a whisper, first among the peasants, then in the court, and finally in the ears of foreign envoys, who would later swear under torture that they had seen something impossible. But if you dig beneath the official scrolls, if you examine the forbidden texts hidden behind false walls in ruined monasteries, you will find his name scrawled in symbols that mean the devourer of the divine flesh. The whisper told of a man cloaked in purple and gold, seated upon a throne carved from the jawbones of criminals, whose banquet tables dripped not with the fat of lamb or the roast of duck, but with slices of something. Born in the 15th year of the Wangsu calendar, Huntai was a sickly child, but the real truth was sealed behind lacquered doors and jade partitions. Huntai had begun a ritual. An ancient belief held by the lost Kiran sect suggested that those who died in terror released a kind of energy, the essence of red. One described him as young beyond his years, with teeth sharp as a tiger's and eyes that never blink. Another, more poetically, claimed that his voice was the sound of boiling blood. Their knives were made of bone, never steel, and their recipes involved obscure techniques, boiling the flesh in wine steeped with lotus ash, smoking it over fires lit with parchment prayers, and always serving the final dish in total silence. This essence, if consumed within minutes of death, could pass strength, knowledge, and even fragments of memory to the eater. Whether Huntai believed this or simply enjoyed the flavor, no one can say for sure. But from the year 1541 onward, executions within the palace grounds were no longer public. They were private, and the corpses were never seen again. One that would spiral, over the years, into a banquet of horror. He trembled in the winter, coughed blood in the spring, and refused all food that wasn't blessed by the palace priests. But one night, this is according to the diary of eunuch T, one of the rare surviving first-hand accounts, Huntai wandered into the kitchens during a famine. The chefs, desperate, had slaughtered a disloyal servant to feed the soldiers, and there, amidst the clamor of knives and screams, young Huntai tasted his first strip of human flesh, redder, warmer, more human. He demanded that they wear white, the color of mourning, when they entered his chambers. Some believed he was haunted, others said he was possessed, but the truth was simpler. He believed that only through pain and death could beauty be truly appreciated, and so he made pain part of the ritual. That man was Emperor Huntai of the Eastern Mauryan dynasty, name stricken from most histories, erased from court records, and blackened by the soot of imperial shame. To the world, he was a god. To his people, he was judgment incarnate. But to those who served him closely, his concubines, his physicians, his food tasters, and his executioners, he was something else entirely. A man who believed that the soul resided in the flesh, and that to eat the flesh of another was to consume their power. His obsession, as far as records can tell, began in his early adolescence. His cheeks grew round, his skin flushed with vitality, and the court healers called it divine intervention. But eunuch Tian wrote something more sinister. His Majesty began asking strange questions. He asked if we could taste courage. He asked if we could taste loyalty. He asked whether fear, when salted, had a flavor. He did not recoil. He did not vomit. He smiled. The following months marked a miraculous recovery. At first, the disappearances were subtle. A stable boy vanished here, a serving girl there. The palace blamed bandits, then rival clans. It is believed that the emperor's court astrologer, Master Hu, was the one who first introduced the idea of spiritual potency in meat. When foreign envoys from the southern lands came to establish trade routes, they noted the emperor's extraordinary vitality. These weren't just metaphors. The emperor's royal chefs, known as the Crimson Circle, were forbidden to cook anything other than his special cuts. The concubines, too, began to notice changes. Huntai grew impatient. He struck them for speaking. One woman, Mei Lin, tried to escape. She was found on the riverbank 2 days later, her body wrapped in silken cloth and marked with lacquer ink. No one dared speak loudly, lest the emperor hear. Even the animals seemed to know something was wrong. The dogs refused to enter the western wing where the banquet hall lay, and the crows that perched on the temple roofs cawed only at night. On her chest, carved into the skin, were 4 words: I fed the emperor well. Once every decade, when the moon rose crimson in the sky, 10 citizens chosen by lottery would be invited to dine with the emperor. None of them ever returned. Their families were given gold. Their homes were blessed. The guests, he wrote, were led into a chamber lit only by oil lamps shaped like human faces. But there is a painting, hidden in the forbidden archive of the Temple of Tien, that tells a different story. We will meet those who fed him. We will hear the voice of a butcher who became a priest, and a priest who became meat. And we will ask the question, how much of ourselves can we give before we stop being human? It shows a man seated on a throne of bones, raising a chalice in his left hand, and inside that chalice floats a single, severed eye. A maid named Liane, disfigured and blind in one eye, was found wandering the rice fields outside the city. She babbled nonsense, clutched a pendant of the imperial seal, and repeated the same sentence over and over. He eats what he loves. He eats what he loves. He eats what he loves. They were made to sit, to pray, to drink wine from goblets carved from bone. And then the emperor entered, not with robes, but with an apron. He walked among them, whispering something into each ear. Children are warned not to sing during the red moon. In one province, it is customary to burn a piece of raw meat at the entrance of the home every winter solstice to satisfy the hunger of those who could not forget the taste. And with each whisper, another fell unconscious, or worse began to scream, and their names were etched into the walls of gratitude in the capital city. Word spread among the palace staff. Eyes grew hollow. In 1547, the emperor unveiled a new tradition, the festival of the Red Moon. But in a secret document smuggled out by a merchant monk named Zhen Yu, the truth was revealed. The 10 were not guests. They were the meal. Zhen Yu's letter, hidden inside a hollowed-out Buddha statue and discovered centuries later, described a night of horrors. Once survivors, there was one escaped the palace during a fire. She died 3 days later. Her tongue had been severed. To this day, in certain corners of the East, the name Huntai is never spoken aloud. Historians scoff. Official records list Huntai as a noble reformer, a builder of roads and temples, a visionary who died peacefully in his sleep. In the next part of our journey, we will delve deeper not just into the rituals, but into the transformation. It is said that those who feed a monster become one. By the year 1550, the palace had long ceased to resemble a place of governance. It had become something darker, an altar. His real name was lost, perhaps purposefully erased. But fragments remain in the scrolls of wandering monkey historians who dared enter the capital under false names. According to surviving fragments of the Forbidden Culinary Codex, the 9 preparations weren't just methods of butchery, they were ceremonies. Each required the subject to undergo 9 stages of suffering, each stage unlocking different chemical compositions in the blood and muscle. The result, a dish that wasn't merely food, but a spiritual journey. For Huntai, it became an addiction far more powerful than hunger, the hunger for transformation. The grand historian Wei Zheng, who dared correct the emperor's lineage on an official scroll, was summoned for a private audience. Each one vanished. Each time, the emperor's cheeks grew rosier, his eyes clearer, his hair darker. A painting discovered centuries later in the catacombs beneath the ruined capital shows Huntai standing barefoot in a pool of blood, holding the severed tongue of the court poet in one hand and a scroll in the other. In it, the chef must prepare 9 courses for the Emperor Senth himself, in one of the most grotesque accounts ever penned in the scrolls of forbidden gastronomy. A chef named Zui Min allegedly marinated his own thigh in ceremonial salts, amputated it without anesthesia, and served it with a black lotus reduction. He had dreamed of the attempt before it occurred. He described the face of the lantern-bearer to his guards 3 days prior. Not immediately. Eyelids flayed, fingers peeled, skin removed in spirals to preserve the nerve endings, all under the bone alchemist's watchful eye. The screams, they say, were used to compose a new imperial anthem played only once during Juntai's final coronation. When asked how he knew, he simply replied, "I ate a prophet." The emperor was pleased. Sui Min died smiling, they say, though his screams were said to echo through the palace for 7 days. The scroll reads, "He spoke in riddles. Now, he speaks in taste." Days later, his polished femur was found in the Hall of Memories, carved into a flute. The melody it played was rumored to make women miscarry and men forget their own names. The bone alchemist was said to possess an uncanny knowledge of anatomy of which nerves produced the finest flavors. There were attempts, squat, desperate, and ultimately doomed to overthrow the mad sovereign, of which emotions marinated best in fear of how long a person must suffer before their flesh turned tender with the sweetness of despair. Comprised of monks, midwives, and disillusioned generals, they believed that Juntai had become a vessel of evil, not metaphorically, but literally, that he had consumed so many souls that he no longer had one of his own. They plotted to assassinate him during the rain harvest festival, disguising their intent as a ceremonial offering of 108 lotus lanterns. Hidden inside one lantern was a vial of azure wine, a neurotoxin so potent it could melt the brain in seconds. Each corridor carried a hush. Each servant walked with eyes lowered and mouths sealed with silence. But the kitchens had become temples of their own, and the Crimson Circle, the Emperor's personal chefs, were no longer mere cooks. They were priests. Their knives, consecrated with blood, their rituals, passed through whisper and scar. Their leader was a man known only as the Bone Alchemist. He was the one who introduced the 9 preparations. By then, the Emperor no longer craved mere flesh. He wanted identity. Each victim chosen had to represent something specific. A scholar who had memorized all 3,000 verses of the old Psalms, a virgin born during an eclipse, a war veteran who had survived 3. He consumed not their meat, but their essence, believing perhaps correctly that their traits would be absorbed into his body. One could say, in a perverse sense, Juntai was building himself from others. But even monsters grow bored, even gods thirst for novelty, and so he turned inward. According to the Third Testament of the Lost Archivist, a heretical text banned by 3 successive dynasties, Juntai began consuming his own people, his inner circle. Then came the chancellor, then the court poet, then the high priest. But what of the Crimson Circle? Were they loyal? Were they mad? Or had they to eat? A parchment retrieved from the corpse of a desert pilgrim tells of a ritual called the 10th dish, of course. No court can function in complete terror. One such attempt came from a faction known only as the Clean Flame. They failed, not only because of the Emperor's food tasters who died in agony minutes after, but because Juntai, according to court rumors, knew all 43 members of the Clean Flame were executed. But execution, in Juntai's court, did not mean death. They were kept alive in the Sistonza labyrinth of tunnels beneath the palace where their bodies were slowly harvested, piece by piece, over weeks. But the most disturbing records, those that even the bravest scribes dared not reproduce, fully came from a young apprentice named Lu Shen, who defected from the Crimson Circle in the year 1553. His confessions, scratched into the inside of a coffin lid using his own fingernails, were discovered only when grave robbers attempted to loot a burial site during the War of the 8 Princes. Lu Shen described a chamber known as the Library of Tastes. It was of all 6 levels below the palace field, not with books, but with organs, preserved tongues, brains, hearts, livers, each labeled with the name, birth date, and spiritual flavor. Some were considered sweet, others bitter, and the rarest of all transcendent. These were believed to be from people who died not in fear, but in ecstatic enlightenment. Mothers drowned their children to save them from selection. The Emperor no longer ruled, he consumed. Juntai believed that by consuming the transcendent, he would ascend beyond mortality, that he could become not just a ruler of men, but of time itself. And so, he ordered the construction of a massive mechanism, the flesh clock, built entirely from bones and sinew, powered by the blood of the condemned. It ticked not in seconds, but in screams. That every century he chooses a city, a place of excess, a place of vanity, and there he dines again, quietly, disguised, until he remembers what he was. Each cry turned a gear, each death wound the spring. But as with all things born of blood, the end was not noble. The gears began to jam. The screams did not synchronize, and the Emperor grew restless. A man whose memory was fractured by horror, and whose dreams foretold cities drowning in blood. We will uncover the documents sealed by the modern Ministry of Culture, and we will ask the question, what if Juntai was not the first? He began consuming those with twin hearts, rare genetic anomalies hunted across the empire. He drank the spinal fluid of he devoured the eyes of albino children, believing they saw the divine. He bathed in milk mixed with crushed bones. His skin became white, translucent. His veins shimmered like golden worms beneath the surface. He stopped speaking. He hissed. In the final entry of the diary of eunuch Tian, pages so fragile they crumble upon touch a scribe, recounts his last glimpse of the emperor. His majesty no longer casts a shadow. He walks, but the air around him bends. He ate the last monk who spoke the sacred name of the old gods. Then he wept blood and called it wine. The city outside the palace had become a wasteland. Famine spread. The people no longer prayed to him. They feared to even name him. They called him the white flame that hung. And then, silence. One day, the palace gates were found open. The flesh clock stopped. The kitchens cold. Not a soul remained. Only blood trails leading nowhere. Some say he transcended. Others say he starved. But there is one tale told by a blind bard in the mountain villages that Huntai still walks. And when he does, the flesh remembers. In part 3, we will follow the fate of the last survivor of the Crimson Circle. After the gates of the imperial palace stood open, and the sun finally touched blood-slicked stone floors that had not known light in over a decade, there remained only one trace of life. A man crawling half dead from beneath the cisterns. His tongue was gone. His hair had turned white. His eyes were stitched shut. And yet, he moved with purpose, feeling each stone with blood-worn fingers. His name forgotten to history but recovered in fragments was Liao Shen, the last surviving member of the Crimson Circle. Jun Li had long believed the official records of Emperor Huntai to be false. His monastery was one of the last to guard the dream scrolls forbidden texts, penned by courtiers and hidden. During the Emperor Esper, these scrolls hinted at something beyond cannibalism, something deeper, a ritual not of hunger, but of remembrance. They called him the tongueless witness. Found by villagers outside the southern city of Bayan, Liao Shen was mistaken at first for a plague victim. Their creed was simple. Flesh is memory. To eat is to inherit. To consume is to become. He was chained, gagged, and offered to the fire. But traces of it appeared throughout history in coded writings, bizarre religious rituals, and unexplained disappearances. It was known as the Oath of the 12 Flavors, a scripture that spoke of 13 aspects of the flesh, only that it required the eater to consume each trait in its purest human form, one flesh, one soul, one life at a time. According to the oath, if one consumed the perfected form of each aspect, fear, joy, rage, wisdom, purity, madness, silence, desire, grief, memory, hope, and emptiness, one would awaken. The 13th gate, a priest in the kingdom of Kilos, who only accepted communion from the tongues of children, a queen in the Northlands, who bathed in fermented blood and never aged a day. That child had been smuggled away by rebels before Juntai's agents could seize him. A desert emir whose court disappeared overnight, leaving only bones arranged in the shape of an open mouth. He carved symbols into wood and soil, symbols so complex that priests wept upon seeing them. He refused meat, would not drink from ceramic vessels, and every new moon he would shriek in tones not heard since the burning of the red temples. But an elder recognized the branding upon his back, a glyph of 3 serpents devouring each other's tails, the ancient seal of the palace kitchen. That mark, once the highest honor among royal chefs, had become the sign of the damned. They spared his life, but his mind was fractured. He spoke in moans. He revealed the existence of a chamber deeper than any in the palace, a vault known as the Echoing Mouth, where the emperor kept recordings of the flesh. These were not scrolls. They were slabs of skin, stretched over bone frames, inscribed with ink, etched in nerves. The stories of the consumed were written into the very bodies that once held them. A scholar monk named Jun Li, hearing of this cursed soul, journeyed to meet him. When Jun Li met Liao Shen, the air grew still. According to the monk's surviving journal, Shen reached for his hand and traced a single word on the monk's palm: listen. Over the following weeks, Liao Shen communicated through carvings and blood drawings. Through Liao Shen's fragmented visions, Jun Li pieced together a truth far more unsettling than legend. The emperor had not acted alone. Huntai was part of a lineage, a thread of rulers and mystics stretching back centuries, even millennia, all of whom believed in the doctrine of the sacred hunger. This doctrine was hidden beneath temples, beneath scrolls, beneath layers of imperial propaganda. Huntai, it turned out, was not the origin. He was the culmination, and Liao Shen had seen the scroll, the one forbidden even within the Crimson Circle. No one knew what lay beyond the gate. Huntai had consumed 11. What remained were hope and emptiness. Hope, Liao Shen believed, had once been found in a child born under 2 suns, a celestial event recorded only once in ancient sky maps. Emptiness, however, could not be born. It had to be made. This was the true purpose of the flesh clock. The screams were not to count time but to erode it. It evaporated, to erase hope, to render meaning void. The emperor had created emptiness inside himself, and when he opened his own chest with a knife of obsidian and pulled out his still-beating heart, it was not blood that spilled but smoke. The palace did not fall. Jun Li wrote all of this, sealed the journal, and vanished. His monastery was burned to the ground. No bodies were ever recovered. But 2 centuries later, during the construction of a modern road through the province of Yu, a stone vault was uncovered by accident, but one whistleblower, calling himself only the archivist, released a series of recordings in the 1990s titled Voices from the Second Mouth. Inside were 13 chairs carved from different bone swale, ox, lion, ape, and one that could not be identified. I am not the last. I am the flavor between. In the center, a table with a single plate, empty. The vault was resealed. The workers silenced. The government said nothing. But since then, stories have surfaced of a girl in the city of Yulin who sleepwalks to butcher shops and speaks fluent Latin in her dreams. Liao Shen's final carving, made with his own femur upon the walls of the sanatorium where he was kept, may hold the answer. It depicts a man seated upon a throne of clouds not bone but with a mouth that stretches across the sky. In his hand is not a fork, nor a blade, but a mirror. We will examine what modern science has dared whisper behind closed labs. We will speak to the last living descendant of the imperial line, hidden under state protection, and we will ask the most terrifying question of all, of a man in Hong Kong whose teeth never decay and who claims to remember being eaten, of a song played once on a pirate radio station in Chengdu 3 notes long, never repeated, that made listeners bleed from their ears and weep from mothers they had never known. These anomalies have been catalogued by the Institute of Forbidden Anthropology, a secretive organization whose very existence is denied by all major governments. In one tape, a voice come deep and eerily familiar speaks in an archaic dialect of the old court tongue. I am not the first. That voice matches no known person, but its waveform, when translated into visual form, reveals a shape long believed to be mythical, a spiral of mouths within mouths. Before his death, he wrote only one phrase on his walls. The emperor was only ever the tongue. A linguist from Osaka University, examining the waveform, had a mental breakdown, which begs the question, if Huntai was not the first, if he was merely one iteration of an eternal hunger, then who was the eater? And what happens when hunger forgets it's hungry? The implications are vast. Underneath, the only legible word. In part 4, we will uncover the final fragments. What if the hunger is waking again? In the modern era, truth no longer hides in shadows. It flickers on screens, slips between corrupted data, pulses beneath city lights where no one bothers to look up. But some truths, the ancient ones, the moist and breathing ones, learn to adapt. They wear new masks. They forget their names so they cannot be called. They stop knocking on doors and instead wait behind your eyes. The legend of Emperor Huntai was once considered nothing more than myth, twisted folklore swallowed by fire and time. But as we reached further into the 21st century, something began to stir, not in the ruins of palaces, but in hospitals, morgues, and server farms. It contained transcripts from an interview with a psychiatric patient held in an isolated facility in Liaoning province. Its mission was to identify traces of culinary cognitionation neuroprotein strands embedded in certain cadavers which, when exposed to high-frequency sound waves, emitted complex data patterns. Within that signal was a whisper. I remember fire. I remember the teeth. I remember the throne of Mara. These patterns, when analyzed, resembled song, language, even emotion. The man, age 43, had been institutionalized after murdering and eating his wife and 2 daughters. Or worse, he had begun to consume himself, and what he became leaked into history. The attending doctors noticed something strange. The boy never cried. He never blinked. By age 2, he spoke fluent Middle Tonga language, dead for nearly 500 years. DNA analysis revealed he had no paternal match, despite his mother's documented fertility treatments. But more unsettling, his brain scans showed signs of pre-encoded memory structures, images of a massive hall filled with blood, recurring nightmares of a clock made of faces. When asked why he did it, his answer chilled even the most hardened investigators. They were filled with light. I was empty. I wanted to remember again. In 2017, a classified file leaked from within the Ministry of Public Health in Beijing, surrounded by faceless diners, and served something warm by a man with translucent skin and no mouth. When shown old renderings of Emperor Huntai recovered from the forbidden archives, he wept, not in fear, in recognition. A chamber, previously collapsed, had reformed into an almost perfect circular cavity. Inside, archaeologists discovered 13 carved hollow stairs, once filled. He claimed he had no memory of the act, only of a dream where he was seated at a massive stone table. That man died the next night, despite being under 24-hour watch. His last words, caught on a static blurred recording: "He is not gone." Clandestine research collectives, even rogue monastic orders, the most radical, suggested this. Memory, when fully metabolized through trauma, could become not just genetically, but through consumption. He is just digesting. The file was labeled Class Omega, inherited anomalies, possible gastronomic transmission. Theories began to emerge in closed circles within government labs. A project known as Red Spiral was quietly funded by a joint Sino-European task force. One corpse, found in a cave in Uzbekistan, produced a signal lasting 7 minutes. Sound familiar? The patterns matched, almost perfectly. The structure of the death hymn inscribed on the palace walls in Part 2. The inference: someone consumed Huntai. But this is where it turns darker. In early 2023, a child was born in the southern region of Guangxi. The child was taken into protective custody by the Department of Cultural Security, a branch unknown to most, but tied curious light to national archival preservation. One former nurse leaked a sentence the child had written repeatedly in crayon: "I am the marrow of many." Meanwhile, satellite scans of the palace, ruined once off, now quietly opened under a restoration initiative, revealed a shift in the 12 of them were empty. One held a heart, still warm, still pulsing. Attempts to remove it failed. Machinery malfunctioned. The floor cracked. One worker claimed he heard a voice say, "Let the table be set again." He was declared mentally unfit and disappeared weeks later. The recovered footage of that chamber was stored on a secure server, until it wasn't. In July of that year, the video leaked to a private Discord group among horror archivists. In it, frame by frame, the pulsing heart seems to beat in rhythm. After 23 seconds, a human face begins to appear faintly in the blood-covered walls. Must hold it dormant, and she warned that the lineage had been interrupted, that for the first time in centuries, the hunger had no vessel. In an interview, since scrubbed from the internet, she revealed something chilling. "When I sleep, I do not dream. I remember, I see hands preparing knives. I smell iron and lotus. I taste flesh I have never eaten, but which knows my name." Digital forensics confirmed the image matched a facial reconstruction of Huntai from ancient paintings. Coincidence or recursion? That same year, the last known descendant of the imperial bloodline Zhu Yiren, a reclusive historian in Taiwan, went public. Locations matched the ancient sites of the lost Eater cults referenced in Part 3. She claimed to be the inheritor of a curse, that every generation, one of the blood must carry the hunger. In 2024, a viral trend emerged on the dark web, a cooking challenge known as #GastricMemory. It involved creating meals using symbolic human ingredients: wine for blood, animal organs, marrow broth. But the disturbing part, a curse transmitted not by bite, but by belief. Many who consumed these meals reported vivid, shared hallucinations, woken up with the flavor of iron in your throat, looked at a stranger and felt not recognition but ownership. They described halls of bone, the whisper of a clock ticking backwards, and always, always, the man in white robes, without a face, feeding them with his own hand. What happens to a god when there's no body to house it? It finds a new tongue. But tonight, when your stomach grumbles, listen carefully. Ask yourself, is it really just food I crave? Or is something inside me remembering what it once was? Let me tell you something unsettling. Red Spiral traced the trend's origin back to a single anonymous uploader. Their handle, @mouthbetwine, their profile picture, a spiral of interlocking teeth. When tracked, the account had posted from 13 different global locations, all within seconds of each other. A final post, before the account vanished. The banquet begins again. Come hungry. So now we must ask, was Huntai ever truly a man, or was he an expression? a ritual repeated by time itself, a biological imperative wrapped in myth. The deeper horror is not that someone ate human flesh, it's that human flesh remembers being eaten. Think about it. Have you ever tasted something familiar in a meal you'd never had? That's not memory, that's hunger. And as this story ends, you may find yourself disturbed, skeptical, even dismissive. Somewhere, the flesh clock ticks again. Not in palaces, not in temples, but behind your ribs. Tick, tick. And as it winds up, just know this was never a story about history. It was always about appetite.